Welcome back to Lesson 4 of Section 9 of Hope. In the last lesson, you learned about how core beliefs rooted in past hurts, especially those rooted in shame, can continue to impact your life and emotions in the present. In this lesson, you will begin to learn about specific strategies to help you change your core beliefs so you can move beyond the lies to live in truth and greater freedom. So let's get started with what you can do to begin to change the way you think and challenge the false ideas attached to your beliefs. The first thing you can do to change your core beliefs is to challenge any distorted thinking and misbeliefs you have with truth. Remember, truth is what corresponds with reality. It is what is really real as God made it and says it is, not how we feel or think reality is. For example, not believing in gravity doesn't make it any less real or true in terms of how it affects you. If you believe wrongly, incorrectly, or only half the truth about gravity, it doesn't change gravity and it will still impact your life. Believing you can fly won't change what happens if you jump off of a building. The teeter-totter of truth is a good place to start in challenging your core beliefs with truth. To use this model, think of truth as a teeter-totter like the one you might have played on in childhood. On one side of the teeter-totter is the truth about real things that are negative, whether present or past, things or future possibilities. On the other end of the teeter-totter is the truth about things that are positive, again, whether present or past things or future possibilities. As you think about yourself, your life, your relationships, etc., you want to keep your balance and avoid tilting too much in one direction or the other. The truth about life and ourselves is usually a mixture of very real negative things or possibilities, but also very real positive things and possibilities. The goal is not to live in denial of bad or negative things and overly shallow and falsely optimistic, but nor is it to be cynical, suspicious, gloomy, and always expecting the worst. Also, more than one thing can be true at once, and the two sides of the teeter-totter don't have to cancel each other out. For example, it is true that getting married is often a scary, stressful, and anxiety-producing event, and we don't have to live in denial that it isn't, while at the same time it is a joyful, loving celebration. The teeter-totter of truth seeks to hold these things in tension, acknowledging the truth on both sides while also not over-exaggerating one aspect over the other. Another example of this is in the Christian faith itself, in that the truth is that we are both depraved sinners, which is negative, and also of immense worth and value to God, which is positive. The teeter-totter of truth never stops acknowledging our sinful bent and depravity, while knowing that it is equally and simultaneously true that through the love and grace of God in Christ, we have a new and secure identity in Him. Although we are sinners, we don't have to live in the shame because of the grace and love of God that He has toward us in saving us. Both things are true at once. A second way we can begin to challenge our core beliefs is by remembering the key words realistic and reasonable. Although it is correct that absolute truth exists because God exists and has created real physical and moral laws into the universe, our tendency to distort things often leads us to extremes and exaggerations in what we believe. As the Bible makes clear, our hearts are often deceitful, and we need the help of the Holy Spirit to show us truth and keep us on check. To combat our tendency to distort things, especially when past pain and experiences are pushing us to do so, it is helpful to ask ourselves whether what we are thinking and believing is realistic and reasonable. Simply asking ourselves, is my view on this reasonable? Am I being realistic? Or is my assessment of this person or situation balanced and fair? Can be a helpful starting place and keep us open to avoiding extremes and exaggeration. Another way to approach this is to step back and consider evidence and facts. Ask yourself what the evidence is to support your conclusion or feelings. Does the evidence actually add up in a way to support your belief, feelings, or conclusions? Or are your feelings exaggerating the evidence or leading you to believe it is true in spite of the evidence? Assessing things in a more objective and rational manner based on evidence and facts can help combat our tendency to be unbalanced or extreme. As Christians, we are committed to the truth, and the one who is the truth. We also know that all truth is God's truth and can always be open to seeking and finding the truth to help keep us in balance. Thinking and living in ways that are based in as much reality, emotional, physical, spiritual, and relational reality as possible, and therefore reasonable and realistic, is vital to our mental health. The third way we can work to challenge our core beliefs is to identify common cognitive distortions and how they are impacting our thinking and actively replace them with truth. Although the previous two strategies represent general ways to do this as you go about your day, it can also be helpful to identify specific common cognitive distortions you may fall into. Cognitive distortions are ways of thinking that do not align with the truth and that easily contribute to emotional and relational problems. In 1976, psychologist Aaron Beck proposed the theory behind cognitive distortions, and in the 1980s, David Burns popularized it with common names and examples. Here is a list of the most common that often impact our emotional health. Filtering. Mental filtering is a way of thinking where you drain and strain all positives in a situation out and instead dwell on the negatives. Even if there are more positive aspects than negative in a situation or a person, you focus on the negatives exclusively. For example, it's performance review time at your company and your manager compliments your hard work several times. In the end, they make one improvement suggestion, but you leave the meeting feeling miserable and dwell on that one suggestion all day long. In our teeter-totter of truth example, you are leaning way over on the side of the negative side of the teeter-totter. Polarization is next. Polarized thinking is thinking about yourself and the world in all or nothing ways. When you engage in thoughts of black or white with no shades of gray, this type of cognitive distortion is leading you. For example, your coworker was a saint until she ate your sandwich. Now you can't stand her. Or you got a B on your last test, so you have failed at being a good student, despite getting only A's before that. All or nothing thinking usually leads to extremely unrealistic standards for yourself and others that could affect your relationships and your motivation. Black or white thoughts may also set you up for failure. For example, you've decided to eat healthy foods, but today you didn't have time to prepare a meal, so you eat a bacon burger. This immediately leads you to conclude that you've ruined your healthy eating routine, so you decide to no longer even try. When you engage in polarized thinking, everything is in either-or categories, and this might make you miss the complexity of most people and situations. Overgeneralization. When you overgeneralize something, you take an isolated negative event and turn it into a never-ending pattern of loss and defeat. For example, in this distortion, you speak up at a team meeting and your suggestions are not included in the project. You leave the meeting thinking, I ruined my chances for promotion. I never say the right thing. Overgeneralization can also manifest in your thoughts about the world and its events. For example, you're running late for work and on your way there you hit a red light. You think, nothing ever goes my way. With overgeneralization, words like always, never, everything, and nothing are frequent in your train of thought. Mind reading. With this distorted way of thinking, without their saying so, you believe you know what people are feeling and why they act the way they do. In particular, you are able to divine how people are feeling toward you. Mind reading depends on a process called projection. You imagine that people feel the same way you do and react to things the same way you do. Therefore, you don't watch or listen carefully enough to notice where they are actually different or what they're actually saying. Mind readers jump to conclusions that are true for them without checking whether they are true for the other person. Discounting the positive. Discounting positives in your way of thinking is similar to mental filtering. The main difference is that you dismiss it as something of no value when you do think of positive aspects. For example, if someone compliments the way you look today, you think they're just being nice. Or if your boss tells you how comprehensive your report was, you discount it as something anyone else could do. If you do well in that job interview, you think it's because they didn't realize that you're not that good. Next is jumping to conclusions. When you jump to conclusions in your thinking, you interpret an event or situation negatively without evidence supporting such a conclusion. Then you react to your assumption. For example, your partner comes home looking serious. Instead of asking how they are, you immediately assume they're mad at you. Consequently, you keep your distance. In reality, your partner had a bad day at work. Jumping to conclusions or mind reading is often in response to a persistent thought or concern of yours. For example, you feel insecure about your relationship, or you think your partner might be losing interest. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is a way of thinking is related to jumping to conclusions. In this case, you jump to the worst possible conclusion in every scenario, no matter how improbable it is. This cognitive distortion often comes with what-if questions. What if he didn't call because he got into an accident? What if she hasn't arrived because she really didn't want to spend time with me? What if I help this person and they end up betraying or abandoning me? Several questions might follow in response to one event. For example, what if my alarm doesn't go off? What if then I'm late for the important meeting? What if I get fired after I've worked so hard at this job? All of these are examples of catastrophizing situations and your thoughts. Personalization is next. Personalization in your thinking leads you to believe that you're responsible for events that in reality are completely or partially out of your control. This cognitive distortion often results in you feeling guilty or assigning blame without contemplating all the factors involved. For example, your child has an accident and you blame yourself for allowing them to go to that party. Or you feel that if your partner had woken earlier, you would have been ready on time for work. With personalizing, you also take things personally. For example, your friend is talking about their personal beliefs regarding parenting, and you take their words as an attack against your parenting style. Next is control fallacies. The word fallacy refers to an illusion, a misconception, or an error. Control fallacies as a way of thinking can go two opposite ways. You either feel responsible or in control of everything in your and other people's lives, or you feel you have no control at all over anything in your life. For example, you couldn't complete a report that was due today. You immediately think, of course I couldn't complete it. My boss is overworking me and everyone was so loud today at the office. Who can get anything done like that? In this example, you place all control of your behavior on someone else or on external circumstances. This is an external control fallacy. The other type of control fallacy is based on the belief that your actions and presence impact or control the lives of others. For example, you think you make someone else happy or unhappy. You think all of their emotions are controlled directly or indirectly somehow by your behaviors. Next is the fallacy of fairness. This cognitive distortion refers to measuring every behavior and situation on a scale of fairness. Finding that other people don't assign the same value of fairness to the event makes you resentful. In other words, you believe you know what is fair and what isn't, and it upsets you when other people disagree with you. The fallacy of fairness will lead you to face conflict with certain people and situations because you feel the need for everything to be fair according to your parameters. But fairness is rarely absolute and can often be self-serving. For example, you expect your partner to come home and massage your feet. It's only fair since you spent all afternoon making them dinner. But they arrive exhausted and only want to take a bath. They believe it's fair to take a moment to relax from the day's chaos so they can pay full attention to you and enjoy your dinner instead of being distracted and tired. Next is blaming. Blaming refers to making others responsible for how you feel. You made me feel bad is what usually defines this cognitive distortion. However, the reality is, even when others engage in hurtful behaviors, how you feel and respond still belongs to you in most situations. The distortion comes from believing that others have more power to affect your life, even more so than yourself or God. Next is should statements that we've identified before. As distorted ways of thinking, should statements become subjective ironclad rules you set for yourself and others without considering the specifics of a circumstance. You tell yourself that things should be a certain way with no exceptions. For example, you think people should always be on time, or that someone independent should never ask for help. When it comes to yourself, you might believe you should always make your bed, or you should always make people laugh. You should be better, you constantly tell yourself. When these things don't happen, they really depend on many factors. You feel guilty, disappointed, let down, or frustrated, and you may believe you're trying to motivate yourself with these statements, such as, I should go to the gym every day. However, when circumstances change and you can't do what you should, you become angry and upset. You got out of work late and couldn't get to the gym, for example. Next is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is a way of thinking that leads you to believe that the way you feel reflects reality. I feel this way about the situation, hence it must be a fact. This is how cognitive distortions in this area work. For example, feeling inadequate in a situation turns into, I don't belong anywhere. This cognitive distortion might also lead you to believe future events depend on how you feel. For example, you may firmly believe something bad will happen today because you woke up feeling anxious. You might also assess a random situation based on your emotional reaction. If someone says something that makes you angry, you immediately conclude that person is treating you poorly. Next is the fallacy of change. The fallacy of change way of thinking has you expecting other people will change their ways to suit your expectations or needs, particularly when you pressure them enough. For example, you want your partner to focus only on you, despite knowing that they've always been very social and value time with friends. So every time they go out, you let them know it's not okay with you. Eventually, you know they will change their ways and want to stay home all the time. Global labeling. Labeling or mislabeling refers to taking a single attribute and turning it into an absolute. This happens when you judge and then define yourself or others based on an isolated event. The labels assigned are usually negative and extreme. For example, you see your new teammate applying makeup before a meeting and you call them shallow. Or they don't submit a report on time and you label them useless or lazy. This is an extreme form of overgeneralization that leads you to judge an action without taking the context into an account. This, in turn, leads you to see yourself and others in ways that might not be accurate. Assigning labels to others can impact how you interact with them. This, in turn, could add friction to your relationships. When you assign those labels to yourself, it can hurt your self-esteem and confidence, leading you to feel insecure and anxious. Always being right. Having a desire to be right in this area turns into a cognitive distortion when it trumps everything else, including evidence and other people's feelings. In this cognitive distortion, you see your own opinions as facts of life. This is why you will go to great lengths to prove that you're right. For example, you quarrel with your sibling about how your parents haven't supported you enough. You're convinced this was the case all the time, while your sibling believes it varied according to the situation. Since your sibling doesn't feel the same way, you become angry and say things that rub your sibling the wrong way. You know they're getting upset, but you continue the argument just to prove your point. Lastly is the heaven's reward fallacy. This faulty way of thinking is when you expect all your sacrifice and self-denial to pay off, as if there were someone keeping score. You feel bitter when the reward doesn't come as expected. The problem is that while you are always doing the right thing, if your heart really isn't in it, you end up physically and emotionally depleting yourself. As you can see, there are many ways that our thinking can easily get us off track and affect us emotionally, without us even being aware of it. Distorted ways of thinking are often so normal for us we don't realize how they are keeping us stuck or damaging our self-worth, emotions, or relationships. In addition to these common core distortions, we also often believe distortions, half-truths, or lies in specific areas of thinking, such as our beliefs about emotions, relationships, life itself, God, or our identities that affect our perceptions and feelings. So in addition to identifying specific cognitive distortions like those I just described, You can reflect further on specific areas of your life using the strategies for identifying cognitive distortions outlined in this section to help you begin to combat them with truth in each specific area. For example, start a journal with a section for tracking the beliefs you have in each of these areas: emotions, relationships, your view of yourself, being a man, being a woman, God, and maybe other things. In this example, seen on this page, you can start by examining your beliefs about other people and write down what comes to mind when you fill in the statements, such as, my wife should, or my boss never, or my kids always. As you fill in the blanks based on your assumptions and internal thoughts, it will help you to identify the beliefs you have toward others and how it is affecting your emotions. As you identify a distorted belief in each area, write it down in your journal, and alongside it, with a more reasonable, realistic, rational, and biblical belief to take its place, such as is shown in this sample grid. You can also find scripture verses to put there to remind you of the truth. Finally, you can also use the ABC process we reviewed previously to walk back through specific situations to help you practice identifying and replacing cognitive distortions. I encourage you to complete this process, especially after any events where you think you overreacted or had a more extreme emotion. Here's the process you can follow. First, identify the activating event. Describe the event or trigger that occurred right before your negative emotional reaction or behavior started. Next, identify the thoughts, words, and messages you were telling yourself or reacting to at the time. What key words or phrases were happening in your thinking? How would you summarize what you believed in that moment and why? What cognitive distortions do they represent about emotions, relationships, life, yourself, God, etc. from the list we just described? What did you miss? What was reasonable or unreasonable, realistic or unrealistic about your thoughts and beliefs at that time? What evidence or facts were you basing your reactions on? Then describe the emotions you had and how you think they were connected to your beliefs and self-talk. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how extreme were your emotions? What core beliefs or fears were they connected to? Next, review your response and action or behavior. What actions did you take or words did you use based on your thoughts and emotions? What would you do differently now? And finally, consequences. What were the pros and cons of how you responded and how things worked out? What would you like to do differently next time? After walking through this self-assessment of the event or situation, you can spend some time writing down specific words and phrases that you can change and that would be more helpful based on your new perspective of the distortions you were having. For example, if you found yourself thinking something like, I can't stand it when these things happen, or you always make me so mad, as part of your situation, you can write down a replacement statement of things like, I would prefer if things would be different, or it would be helpful to me if this could have happened instead of that, or sometimes I feel frustrated with that person, but sometimes I don't. By actively thinking of ways to reduce the distortions and balance the extremes to a more truthful approach, you will help yourself to practice a new way of thinking that will also result in less extreme emotions over time. Using activities such as these and other ways mentioned in this lesson to actively identify and challenge your beliefs and self-talk can significantly reduce anxiety, depression, and shame. However, there are other important strategies you can also use to help reform your beliefs at a deeper emotional level. I will explain more of these in the next lesson.